Love can make people write poems, build monuments, and cross oceans. But sometimes it makes them steal paintings, abandon thrones, start scandals, fake funerals, dig up corpses, and make decisions so stupid that history itself sounds embarrassed. This is not a video about romance at its best. This is history's evidence file against common sense, the dumbest things people ever did for love. 1. In the early 1700s, Stedibonnet had everything a reasonable man could want. He was a rich plantation owner in Barbados, had a comfortable estate, a respected name, a family, and no practical reason to wake up one morning and become a pirate. But apparently domestic life was not giving him the peaceful gentleman experience he had hoped for. According to later accounts, his wife's constant nagging pushed him so far over the edge that he bought himself an armed ship, hired a crew out of his own pocket, and sailed into the Caribbean with absolutely no idea what he was doing. He had no real sailing experience. He paid his pirates wages like they were office employees. Other pirates thought he was ridiculous. Blackbeard himself eventually treated Bonnet like a rich hobbyist who had wandered into professional crime by mistake. Bonnet was captured and hanged in 1718. So yes, this man apparently looked at married life, looked at piracy, looked at the possibility of execution, and somehow decided the rope sounded more peaceful. 2. Boris Godunov, Tsar of Russia, around the beginning of the 1600s, treated his children's marriages less like family matters and more like a national infrastructure project. He was obsessed with finding the perfect political matches for his son Fyodor and his daughter Xenia, and according to some accounts, he became so controlling that he interfered with the marriage plans of other nobles too. Basically, the romantic lives of Russian aristocrats were put on pause because one anxious father could not get his own children properly matched first. Xenia's potential suitors kept disappearing from the board in increasingly dramatic ways. One Danish prince traveled all the way to Moscow, only to die mysteriously before the wedding. Other matches collapsed for political reasons. Boris managed to turn royal matchmaking into a traffic jam for the entire nobility. It was helicopter parenting, but with crowns, ambassadors, and international consequences. 3. In 1911, an Italian handyman named Vincenzo Perugia walked into the Louvre, removed the Mona Lisa from the wall, hid it under his clothes, and walked out like he had just stolen a coat from a badly managed shop. The most famous painting in the world then vanished for more than 2 years. When Perugia was finally caught trying to sell it in Florence, he claimed he had rescued it for Italy because Leonardo da Vinci was Italian. Very patriotic, very dramatic. Also not very legally convincing, since the painting had been in France for centuries through perfectly legitimate royal ownership. But the story gets even weirder because some versions suggest he may also have wanted to impress a woman. Imagine thinking the best way to win someone's heart is not flowers, not poetry, not dinner, but casually stealing the Mona Lisa. Whether love was truly part of the motive or just a later rumor, Perugia served only 7 months and somehow became a folk hero in Italy. Art theft, nationalism, and possible flirting. The worst first date strategy ever invented. 4. Hector Berlioz, the great French composer, was madly in love with the Irish actress Harriet Smithson. Unfortunately for him, Harriet was not nearly as enthusiastic about this arrangement. So Berlioz responded in the calm and healthy manner of a 19th-century romantic artist. He showed up at a gathering, produced a vial of poison, and drank it in front of her. It was melodrama at full volume. The message was basically, love me, or watch me die in real time. But then the poison started working, and Berlioz suddenly discovered a powerful new interest in continuing to live. Luckily, he had brought an antidote with him, because even his suicide gesture had a backup plan. He swallowed it, vomited violently in front of everyone, survived, and reportedly went off to eat afterward. Harriet did eventually marry him, which may be one of history's clearest examples of someone being worn down by sheer theatrical persistence. The marriage was miserable because, shockingly, pretending to poison yourself is not a stable foundation for domestic happiness. 5. Nikola Tesla helped shape the electrical age. He imagined technologies decades before the world was ready for them. He gave humanity alternating current, brilliant inventions, and a legacy of genius. He did not, however, have much of a normal romantic life. Tesla never married and had no known long-term partner. But he did have one emotional attachment that became legendary: a white pigeon that visited his window in New York. Tesla insisted this bird was special. More than special, he once said, "I loved that pigeon as a man loves a woman, and she loved me." He even claimed that when the pigeon came to him one night, powerful beams of light shone from her eyes. When she died, Tesla said he felt his life's work was over. So, one of the greatest scientific minds in modern history ended his days believing his deepest love had been a pigeon. The man could understand electricity better than almost anyone alive, but the human heart remained completely impossible to explain. 6. Honoré de Balzac, one of France's greatest novelists, spent 17 years chasing a Polish countess named Eulina Hanska through letters, longing, and financial disaster. They first connected in 1832 after she sent him a fan letter, and from there, Balzac launched one of the longest romantic campaigns in literary history. There was just one small problem. She was already married to a wealthy landowner. That did not stop Balzac. He wrote hundreds of letters. He poured out his soul. He traveled across Europe to see her whenever he could, usually spending money he absolutely did not have. Her husband died in 1841, which should have opened the door, but legal, family, and financial complications delayed everything for years. Finally, in March 1850, Balzac married her in Ukraine. After 17 years of obsession, waiting, travel, debt, and handwritten devotion, he got his happy ending. For about 5 months, he died in August. That is not romance. That is the universe hitting send on the cruelest possible reply. 7. Austrian artist Oskar Kokoschka had a fiery affair with Alma Mahler, one of the most famous women in Viennese society. When she left him and married architect Walter Gropius, Kokoschka reacted with the kind of restraint one expects from a man who definitely should not be trusted near puppeteers. He commissioned a life-size doll of Alma from a Munich doll maker and sent disturbingly specific instructions about how it should look, feel, and resemble her body. When the doll arrived, he was disappointed, because apparently even the custom-made replacement woman did not meet expectations. But he kept it anyway. He dressed it, took it to the opera, brought it to dinners, and even hired a maid to look after it. Eventually, during a party, he staged a symbolic breakup. He poured red wine over the doll, cut off its head, and left it outside in the garden. Kokoschka called it the end of his obsession. Most people call that several red flags wearing a tuxedo. 8. In 1936, King Edward VIII had to choose between being monarch of the British Empire and marrying Wallis Simpson, an American woman who had already been divorced twice. The Church of England objected. The government objected. The British establishment objected so loudly that the entire crisis basically became a constitutional alarm bell. Edward looked at the throne, looked at the empire, looked at centuries of royal duty, and said, "No thanks, I choose Wallis." After less than a year as king, he abdicated in a radio speech, saying he could not carry on without the help and support of the woman I love. His brother George VI became king instead, despite being completely unprepared for the role, and eventually had to lead Britain through World War II. Edward and Wallis moved abroad, lived in comfortable exile, and managed to become politically embarrassing in several new ways. He gave up an empire for love and received, in exchange, one of the most awkward footnotes in royal history. 9. Caligula had many alarming habits, but his devotion to his sister Drusilla was extreme even by Caligula's standards. Ancient writers strongly imply that their relationship went far beyond normal sibling affection, and when Drusilla died in 38 AD, Caligula responded not with grief, but with imperial madness. He declared her a goddess, making her the first Roman woman to receive that honor. Then he forced Rome into a period of public mourning so severe that ordinary human behavior became dangerous. According to the ancient accounts, people were forbidden to laugh, bathe, or dine with their families during this mourning period. The punishment could be death. Some were reportedly executed for seeming too cheerful. Imagine an entire city being legally required to be miserable because the emperor could not process loss without making it everyone else's emergency. Caligula was assassinated a few years later by his own guards, and this was just one item on a very, very long list of reasons. 10. In the 1560s, Ivan the Terrible decided Queen Elizabeth I of England might make a suitable wife. Royal marriage proposals were normal enough in that era, but Ivan's emotional control was not. Elizabeth politely declined, explaining that she was not interested in marriage and steering the conversation toward trade instead. Ivan did not take this like a mature international statesman. He exploded in writing, calling her a vulgar maid and accusing her of being ruled by merchants and commoners instead of governing like a proper monarch. In other words, the man called the Terrible tried to neg the Queen of England because she would not marry him. Elizabeth reportedly found the whole thing more amusing than devastating and continued ruling her kingdom without needing advice from Moscow's angriest rejected suitor. The trade relationship survived. Ivan's pride did not. 11. Attila the Hun terrorized Europe in the 5th century. He devastated Roman territories, led vast armies, and earned the nickname Scourge of God. He survived battles, political enemies, assassination plots, and the general hazard of being the most feared warlord on the continent. Then came his wedding night. In 453 AD, after marrying a young woman named Ildiko, Attila celebrated with a feast and apparently drank with the confidence of a man who had never been defeated by anything. That night, he suffered a severe nosebleed while sleeping. Too drunk to wake properly, he choked on his own blood and was found dead the next morning. The man who made emperors panic was not killed in battle, not by betrayal, not by poison, but by alcohol, bad timing, and his own nose. History is very good at reminding powerful men that dignity is optional. 12. Pedro I of Portugal loved Inés de Castro, his mistress and the woman he considered the love of his life. His father disapproved of the relationship so much that in 1355 he had her murdered. Pedro did not forget. When he became king, he hunted down 2 of her killers and had their hearts torn out. And according to the most famous legend, that was only the beginning. Pedro allegedly had Inés' body exhumed, dressed in royal clothing, placed on a throne, and presented to the Portuguese court as queen. The nobles were then supposedly forced to kneel before her and kiss her dead hand. This was not a tasteful memorial service. This was a decomposing corpse receiving courtly respect from terrified aristocrats who suddenly wished they had chosen any other career. Love may be patient, love may be kind. But in medieval Portugal, love could also be deeply, deeply unsettling. 13. Grigory Potemkin was not just Catherine the Great's lover. He was one of the most powerful men in the Russian Empire, and his relationship with Catherine helped shape imperial policy in the late 1700s. When Catherine toured the newly conquered southern territories in 1787, Potemkin wanted everything to look magnificent. According to the famous legend, he created fake or heavily staged villages along her route through Crimea, complete with painted facades, cheerful peasants, and a carefully manufactured sense of prosperity. As Catherine moved on, the same scenery was supposedly taken apart and rebuilt farther ahead. Historians still debate how fake these Potemkin villages really were, but the phrase survived as a permanent symbol of impressive-looking deception. Potemkin also reportedly showered Catherine with diamonds by the sack. Not a necklace, not a ring, sacks of diamonds. Some men bring flowers. Potemkin brought stage-managed provincial development and wholesale gemstones. 14. Peter the Great was not a man known for gentle emotional processing. When he suspected his wife Catherine of having an affair with a courtier named Willem Mons, Peter responded in the most Peter the Great way imaginable. Mons was arrested, accused of corruption, and beheaded in 1724. But execution was not enough. Peter reportedly had Mons's head preserved in alcohol and placed where Catherine could see it. Some accounts say he first brought her to view the severed head publicly, watching closely to see how she reacted. Catherine apparently showed no emotion, which is either astonishing self-control or the most terrifying royal poker face in history. They stayed married until Peter died just a few months later. Catherine then became empress, and one of her early acts was to have that jar removed. A small interior design choice, perhaps, but an extremely understandable one. 15. In 1740, Empress Anna Ivanovna of Russia decided to punish Prince Mikhail Golitsyn, who had angered her by converting to Catholicism and marrying an Italian woman without approval. Anna's revenge was not quick, simple, or normal. She forced him to marry one of her servants in a humiliating public ceremony, then staged the wedding inside a palace made entirely of ice on the frozen Neva River in St. Petersburg. The walls were ice, the furniture was ice, the decorations were ice. Even the bed was ice because apparently cruelty needed a theme. The newlyweds were locked inside for the night during a Russian winter with no heat. They survived only because the bride used straw and heavy clothing to keep them from freezing. Anna treated the entire thing as entertainment. It was not romance. It was a royal sadism festival with wedding vows. 16. Sultan Ibrahim I of the Ottoman Empire ruled in the 1640s and had a reputation for instability that was, frankly, earned. He was obsessed with his harem, which reportedly included hundreds of women. Then a rumor reached him that one concubine had been unfaithful. A sane ruler might investigate. Ibrahim chose a different path. According to the infamous story, he ordered all of the women in the harem, around 280 of them, tied in weighted sacks and drowned in the Bosporus because he could not identify the supposed offender and therefore decided to eliminate the entire category. Only one woman was said to have survived, rescued by a passing French ship. Ibrahim himself was later overthrown and strangled by his own court. Jealousy has caused many terrible decisions, but Ibrahim managed to turn insecurity into mass murder with administrative efficiency. 17. Carl Tanzler was a radiology technician in Key West, Florida in the 1930s, and he became obsessed with a young tuberculosis patient named Elena Milagro de Hoyos. She died in 1931. Most people, even in intense grief, do not respond by committing 7 years of corpse-related horror. Tanzler did. He dug up Elena's body, brought it home, and tried to preserve and reconstruct it. He used coat hangers and piano wire to hold the skeleton together, replaced the eyes with glass, filled the body with rags to maintain its shape, and covered the remains with wax and plaster. He dressed her, kept her in his bed, and allegedly danced with her. When authorities discovered the situation in 1940, the town was horrified. Tanzler insisted it was love. The charges were eventually dropped because the statute of limitations had expired. He later lived with a life-sized effigy of Elena because apparently even reality had given up trying to stop this story. 18. In 1981, John Hinckley Jr. decided that the best way to impress actress Jodie Foster was to shoot the President of the United States. Not write a letter, not introduce himself, not make peace with the fact that she did not know him. Shoot Ronald Reagan. Hinckley had become obsessed with Foster after repeatedly watching Taxi Driver, and he convinced himself that an assassination attempt would somehow prove his devotion. Outside a Washington hotel, he shot Reagan and 3 others. Foster, who had no personal relationship with him at all, was horrified. Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity and spent decades in psychiatric care. It remains one of the most disturbing examples of someone confusing fantasy, celebrity obsession, and romance into one catastrophic delusion. As dating strategies go, it is hard to rank below attempt presidential assassination. 19. Franz Liszt was the 19th century's version of a stadium rock star, except his instrument was a piano, and his fans were somehow even more intense. In the 1840s, women at his concerts screamed, fainted, rushed the stage, and treated his performances like religious events with better hair. The poet Heinrich Heine coined the term Listomania because the reaction looked like mass hysteria. Fans collected his cigar ends and wore them in lockets. They fought over broken piano strings. Some tried to grab pieces of his hair. Even food from his plate could become a treasured souvenir. Liszt knew exactly what he was doing and leaned into the drama, playing with the confidence of a man who understood he was turning classical music into celebrity worship. Long before Beatlemania, The world already had women nearly fighting over a pianist's trash. Humanity has always been ridiculous about famous people. 20. In December 1888, Vincent van Gogh, already in severe psychological distress while living in Arles, cut off part of his ear. Historians still debate the exact details, including how much of the ear was removed. But what happened next is the part everyone remembers. He wrapped the severed piece in paper, went to a local brothel, and handed it to a woman named Rachel, reportedly telling her to keep it carefully. Rachel was horrified, which is the only reasonable reaction when a man presents you with a body part like it is a romantic souvenir. Van Gogh then returned home and nearly bled to death. The episode has often been romanticized by popular culture, but at its core, it was not a beautiful gesture. It was a deeply unwell man doing something frightening and tragic. Love may inspire art, but it should not inspire delivery of your own ear. 21. Timothy Dexter was an eccentric American businessman in the late 1700s who became rich despite making decisions that sounded like financial self-sabotage. Somehow, his personal life was even stranger. Dexter once staged his own funeral to test whether his wife loved him enough to cry. He hid nearby while mourners gathered, speeches were delivered, and everyone performed grief for a man who was, inconveniently, still alive. His wife did not cry. Dexter was so offended by this failure that he jumped out of the coffin and began beating her with his cane, furious that she had not mourned him properly. The guests, understandably, scattered. So Dexter faked his death, secretly judged his wife's emotional performance, failed to get the reaction he wanted, and then blamed her for the results of his insane experiment. That is not love. That is a relationship test designed by a haunted carnival barker. 22. King Ludwig I of Bavaria became completely infatuated with Lola Montez, an Irish-born dancer who arrived in Munich in 1846 pretending to be a Spanish noblewoman. Ludwig believed the performance very strongly. He gave her money, status, a palace, and eventually Bavarian citizenship. But Lola was not content to be a royal favorite. She wanted political power too. She began interfering in government, demanding the removal of ministers, inserting herself into policy disputes, and enraging almost everyone around the king. Students protested. Newspapers attacked her. The political class turned against him. By 1848, riots broke out in Munich. Lola was expelled, and Ludwig was forced to abdicate. A king lost his throne because he let a fake Spanish aristocrat with no governing experience turn his court into a one-woman political crisis. That is not romance. That is a national security failure with flirting. 23. Mark Antony had power, armies, wealth, and a serious chance of dominating Rome. Then he met Cleopatra, and his life became one of history's most expensive romantic collapses. Antony abandoned his Roman wife Octavia, allied himself openly with Cleopatra, recognized her children as heirs to territories Rome considered its own, and started handing out eastern provinces like party favors at the world's most politically disastrous dinner. Rome was not amused. Octavian used the relationship as propaganda, painting Antony as a man bewitched by an Eastern queen and unfit to rule Romans. The conflict ended at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, where Antony and Cleopatra's forces were crushed. Back in Egypt, Antony heard a false report that Cleopatra was dead and stabbed himself. Cleopatra died shortly after. Two of the most powerful people alive were destroyed by love, politics, pride, and a complete inability to listen when everyone said, "This is going to end badly." 24. In 1964, Australian athlete Reg Spears found himself stranded in London without enough money for a ticket home. He missed his wife and young daughter, and instead of borrowing money like a normal person, he chose the coffin-shaped nightmare option. Spears built a wooden crate barely large enough to fit inside, packed himself with a little water and a tin for bodily needs, and had a friend ship him as air cargo from London to Australia. The journey lasted more than 3 days. The crate was moved, dropped, stored, delayed, and even routed through India during a layover. At any point, he could have died from thirst, heat, mishandling, or the simple fact that human beings are not luggage. But Spears survived. When the crate arrived in Perth, he climbed out and went home. It was either a heroic act of love, an extreme refusal to pay airfare, or both. 25. Julie d'Aubigny, known as La Maupin, was a 17th-century French opera singer, swordswoman, and walking argument against boring biographies. She fell in love with a young woman whose family, horrified by the relationship, sent the girl to a convent. Julie did not accept this. She broke into the convent, stole the corpse of a recently dead nun, placed it in her lover's bed, set fire to the building as a distraction, and escaped with the woman. She was sentenced to death by burning, which seems severe until you remember the arson, corpse theft, and kidnapping. But she later received a royal pardon, because apparently even the French monarchy had to admit the whole thing had style. Julie also once kissed a woman at a royal ball, fought 3 men who objected, defeated all of them in duels, and then returned to the party. Some people pursue love. Julie d'Aubigny stormed it with a sword. 26. When Mumtaz Mahal died in childbirth in 1631, Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan was devastated. According to legend, his grief was so intense that his hair turned gray almost overnight. Then he decided to build her a tomb unlike anything the world had ever seen. The Taj Mahal took more than 20 years, used around 20,000 workers, and required marble transported from hundreds of miles away, along with precious stones from across Asia. It became one of the most beautiful monuments ever created in the name of love. It also cost an extraordinary amount of money. The spending placed pressure on the imperial treasury, and Shah Jahan's own son Aurangzeb eventually overthrew him and confined him in Agra Fort. In his final years, Shah Jahan could reportedly look across the river at the monument he had built for his dead wife. He created the ultimate symbol of love and then spent his old age imprisoned with a view of the bill. 27. Roxolana, also known as Hurrem Sultan, rose from captivity to become the most powerful woman in the Ottoman Empire. She did something almost unthinkable. She convinced Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent to legally marry her, breaking a tradition that had lasted for generations. But Hurrem was not just a beloved wife. She was a political force. She worked to secure the succession for her own son Selim, and that meant neutralizing Mustafa, Suleiman's popular and talented firstborn son, by another woman. Through court intrigue and influence, Hurrem and her allies helped convince Suleiman that Mustafa was a threat. In 1553, Mustafa was strangled on his father's orders. Selim eventually became sultan and gained a reputation far less glorious than his father's. One woman's love, ambition, and survival instincts reshaped the Ottoman court and changed the empire's future. Whether that future improved is a very different question. 28. Henry VIII wanted out of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon because she had not given him a surviving male heir, and because he had fallen obsessively for Anne Boleyn. The Pope refused to annul the marriage. Henry, responding with the calm flexibility for which he is not famous, broke England away from the Catholic Church, made himself supreme head of the Church of England, dissolved monasteries, seized church wealth, and permanently changed the religious history of an entire country. All so he could marry Anne. They wed in 1533. She gave birth to Elizabeth, one of England's future greatest monarchs, but not the son Henry wanted. Within 3 years, Henry turned on her, accused her of adultery, treason, and other convenient crimes, and had her beheaded in 1536. This man rearranged the religion of millions to marry a woman, then executed her when the fantasy expired. As romantic decisions go, it is hard to get more nationally destructive. 29. Juana of Castile, later known as Juana the Mad, was deeply attached to her husband Philip the Handsome of Burgundy. When Philip died suddenly in 1506, Juana did not move through grief in any ordinary way. She traveled across Spain with his coffin for months, turning mourning into a mobile royal disturbance. According to the most famous stories, she had the coffin opened repeatedly so she could look at his body and make sure no other woman had somehow gotten near him. She supposedly refused to allow women close to the corpse, as if Philip might still be capable of betrayal from inside a coffin. The procession dragged on through bad weather, poor roads, and the increasing concern of everyone involved. Eventually, her father Ferdinand had her confined, and she spent the rest of her life in isolation. Her love for Philip became less a romance than a lifelong prison. 30. Catherine Howard, Henry VIII's fifth wife, was a teenager married to a king nearly 50 years old, overweight, dangerous, and already famous for having one wife executed. She was young, trapped, and surrounded by court politics that could kill. Then Thomas Culpeper, a handsome courtier, began paying attention to her. Catherine made the worst possible choice in the worst possible palace with the worst possible husband. She began a secret affair under the roof of a man who had already created a new church to solve his marriage problems and had no emotional objection to beheading wives. The affair was discovered. Culpeper was arrested and executed. Catherine was executed in February 1542, around the age of 19. It is both tragic and incredibly reckless. Falling in love at Henry VIII's court was dangerous enough. Cheating on Henry VIII was basically writing your own death warrant in perfume. 31. Évariste Galois was one of the most brilliant young mathematicians in history. By his teenage years, he had developed ideas that would later transform abstract algebra. But in 1832, at only 20 years old, he became involved in a dispute connected to a young woman. The exact details remain unclear, but the outcome was brutally simple: a duel. Galois believed he was likely to die, so the night before, he stayed up frantically writing down his mathematical discoveries. His notes were rushed, desperate, and filled with unfinished ideas. In one famous margin, he wrote that he had no time. The next morning, he was shot in the abdomen and died the following day. The work he left behind became the basis of Galois theory, one of the foundations of modern algebra. He lost his life in a murky romantic dispute, but his final night scribbles helped reshape mathematics forever. 32. Emperor Xuanzong of China's Tang dynasty adored his consort Yang Guifei, and one of the strangest symbols of that devotion was fruit. Yang loved fresh lychees, which spoiled quickly and grew far from the capital. So Xuanzong created an express relay system of riders and horses to bring them to her at peak freshness from the southern provinces. Men rode day and night across enormous distances so one woman could enjoy her favorite fruit before it lost its flavor. Meanwhile, corruption spread, military unrest grew, and the empire was sliding toward catastrophe. But apparently the Lychee logistics department remained fully operational. When the An Lushan rebellion erupted in 755, it nearly destroyed the Tang dynasty. Xuanzong fled, and his own soldiers eventually demanded Yang Guifei's death. He agreed. After all the horses, all the riders, all the imperial effort spent delivering fruit, he could not save the woman he had spoiled so extravagantly. So yes, love gave the world poetry, art, and the Taj Mahal, but it also gave us piracy, executions, political disasters, assassination attempts, grave robbery, and one deeply emotional relationship with a pigeon. Now be honest in the comments. Who was the biggest idiot in this video and who did we forget? But bring a strong example. If nobody was ruined, exiled, executed, overthrown, or publicly humiliated, it does not count. Like, subscribe, and remember, history is basically a long warning label for human emotions.